Our Across the Aisle segment tonight. On Saturday, liberals held the March for Our Lives, a massive rally for gun control headlined by students from Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. The media touted it as an event honoring the 17 victims of the shooting at the Parkland, Florida high school and as a stand against, quote, gun violence. But the liberal agenda was blatantly clear in the march. Take a look.
Hold them out! Hold them out! Hold them out! Hold them out! First off, I'm going to start off by putting this price tag right here as a reminder for you guys to know how much Marco Rubio took for every student's life in Florida. $1.05. 96 people die every day from guns in our country, yet most representatives have no public stance on guns. And to that, we say no more. We are going to make this the voting issue. When politicians say that your voice doesn't matter because the NRA owns them, we say no more. When politicians send their thoughts and prayers with no action, we say no more. And to those politicians supported by the NRA that allow the continued slaughter of our children and our future, I say get your resumes ready.
We will take the big and we will take the small, but we will keep fighting. When they give us that inch, that bump stock ban, we will take a mile. We are not here for breadcrumbs, we are here for real change.
With me now, history professor and author of Obama's America, Ian Reifowitz. Ian, good to see you.
Good to see you again, Liz.
All right, Ian. So we talked about the March for Our Lives earlier in the show with a Republican, and I wanted to give a Democrat a chance to respond here because from where I'm sitting, I understand the compassion, I understand the anger, I understand the desire to take action that these students feel. I do. I think everybody in our country feels that same way. I said earlier in the show that I thought some of their anger was misplaced in the solutions that they were calling for, given what I believe the causes of this attack in Parkland, Florida were. What could have stopped it wasn't done. But when we're talking about the organizers of the march, the students that we saw, including David Hogg, the organization behind the march, Empower, which is the youth arm of the Women's March, Ian, I have to put it to you very bluntly and say, convince me that these people that organize this march aren't hypocrites. Convince me that what they're calling for doesn't contradict other portions of their agenda, that they're not using emotion to, I guess, exploit people who are hurting and desire to help other people just to push a radical leftist gun control agenda.
Well, I don't know what other parts of their agenda are in contradiction with what they're saying. I can only take what they're saying that they want to do at face value. I think what we need to do, and I think what they're trying to do, is get the country to a place where we can figure out how can we do the things that we know will improve safety and reduce the number of deaths without, on the other hand, taking away the right of people to bear arms. Is there some kind of middle ground? And I think that's really the most important thing. To me, the individual people involved in this march or that march are not as important as getting to that place where people can feel comfortable with some kinds of compromise. And I'm hoping that these kinds of marches are helpful. They do seem to be moving public opinion in that direction. I mean, you saw a couple of polls have come out recently where you've seen almost 100% support for things like universal background checks and growing support for other things that are more aggressive moves, but that still don't truly limit people's gun rights. Banning AR-15s or other kinds of weapons that fire rapid rounds don't stop anybody from owning a gun to protect themselves in their home, or don't even stop them from owning a concealed weapon that they can walk around with. You can't conceal an AR-15. So there has to be some kind of middle ground between allowing people to maintain their right to have a gun without missing out on possible solutions. We don't allow people to have bazookas. We don't allow people to have tanks. So there are some limits, obviously, on the right to bear arms. The question is, where is that middle ground where we can achieve both goals, increased safety and the preservation of gun rights?
Right, and I understand what you're saying. I think we may have been watching a different march here because I did not see a march this weekend that was looking for any middle ground at all. There are things. I agree with you 100%. There are things that we can compromise on. I mean, we can compromise on holding the FBI accountable for violating their own protocol, which they testified to Congress that they did, and not following up on the warnings about the shooter. We can, hold the Broward County Sheriff accountable for improperly responding to these calls. We can hold the school district accountable for not acting on the recommendation of psychologists to have Nicholas Cruz institutionalized. I mean, there's so many things that we we can do. We can abolish gun-free zones because 98% of mass shootings happen in gun-free zones. We can arm security guards in schools, put armed security in schools, or arm teachers. I mean, there's so many things that we can compromise on. We can mandate that government agencies report convictions to the FBI so that when people walk in and try to purchase a gun and go through the background check process, that any convictions that they would have shows up in the government database, which we saw not happen with the Sutherland Springs situation, the Sutherland Springs massacre here. I didn't see, though, Ian, any calls for any of those things at this rally. All I saw was anti-Donald Trump, anti-NRA, anti-Republican, and anti-gun signs. I didn't see anything about trying to find a middle ground.
Well, I'm not going to here to critique the signs that were up at the rally or the speakers that were there. I do know one thing, that more people came to Washington, D.C. for this rally than came to Washington, D.C. for the Trump inauguration. And there were hundreds of thousands of people in cities around the country on sister marches. But let's focus on things that we can do. There was a really interesting examination of Massachusetts gun laws, right? Massachusetts, Boston Globe is a major paper there. They laid out a series of things that Massachusetts does. Now, Massachusetts has the lowest gun death rate in the country, about 3.5 per 100,000. By comparison, Tennessee and other, one of many other states is about 6 times that rate. If every state in the country had Massachusetts's gun death rate, we'd save 27,000 lives a year. And the steps that they have taken do not violate the Second Amendment. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed, the Supreme Court would intervene. People in Massachusetts have gun rights. But saving 27,000 lives per year would be amazing. And taking those steps, they're all very reasonable steps. If you look at what works, we see it. The New England states have very low gun death rates. They're the lowest in the country. You know what state has the highest gun death rate in New England? Vermont. Which one has the loosest gun laws by far? Vermont.
Wait a second, though.
Gun laws
Wait a second.
work.
You understand that according to the FBI statistics and other data from law enforcement reports around the country, you realize that firearms in general, and this is handguns and rifles, firearms are used 80 times more often to save a life than to take a life. 80 times more often they are used to stop attempted murder, attempted rape, attempted assault, attempted burglary, all of those things that ultimately keep people safe. So when you're putting an argument on the table saying, we should limit the right of people to bear arms or ban AR-15s because you argue that nobody uses AR-15s to protect themselves, I mean, that's simply not true.
Well, if what you said was true, then the data would not show what it shows. And it shows that Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, Hawaii, Connecticut, New Jersey are the 6 states with the lowest gun death rates. And those are the states with tight gun laws. So if what you're saying is true, and I'm not going to dispute what you're saying, but I would like to see that data myself. If all these states that have fewer guns in people's hands and tighter gun laws are safer, well, then that suggests that no, in fact, having a gun in the household is not going to be more likely to protect you, because the states that have more guns in the household, like Tennessee, like Alabama,
but that's not true
those
if you
states
take
have
into
higher gun death
consideration.
rates.
No, that's not
But
accurate.
it
If you take
true.
into consideration the large cities, because as we know, most gun violence happens in very urban areas. I mean, Chicago also has some of the strictest gun control, but they have some of the highest levels of gun crime. It's the same with Baltimore. They have very strict gun control, but a very high level of crime. St. Louis, very strict gun control, high level of gun crime, because it depends on the demographic of the area, and it depends on whether it's urban or whether it's rural. So it simply doesn't work to cherry pick what works in one state versus what works for the other in the way that you're trying to do.
First of all, you have to make apples-to-apples comparisons, and that's why state-by-state comparisons are important. There are plenty of big cities. Boston dominates Massachusetts population-wise. New York City, as you know, is a pretty big city. New Jersey is a very urban state. Okay, first of all, so that's one thing that's very important. Chicago has, 1/3 the gun violence rate of New Orleans, and that's another city. Why? Well, New Orleans is in Louisiana, which has virtually no gun laws to speak of. So you have to make apples-to-apples comparisons. New York is a very urban, New York City has a lower rate of violence, lower rate of violent crime than most rural areas in the country. So you have to make apples-to-apples comparisons. State versus state is important. Look at Hawaii. Hawaii has a minuscule death rate. Sometimes it's the number 1, one, sometimes it's number two. Why? Because it's not surrounded by other states that have looser gun laws. It's surrounded by water. Chicago borders Indiana.
Right, and I understand
Indiana
that.
has essentially no gun
allow me
laws.
to interrupt for a second because we're almost out of time here. They're telling me in my ear that I got to wrap this up, but I do want to make one other point. I would just ask you, I mean, it says in our Constitution, in the Second Amendment, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The March for Our Lives is advocating for the outright ban of a rifle, an AR-15, that is in the common use. There are millions and millions and millions of AR-15s that are owned by law-abiding American citizens. Is that something that you agree with? Do you agree with violating our Second Amendment right and taking guns away from citizens who don't use it the vast majority of time to commit crimes but to protect themselves?
I don't find that the AR-15, taking away AR-15s would be a violation of constitutional rights. People can still be armed without AR-15s. Very few people in reality have an AR-15. We can look at the numbers, but it's a relatively
how many
low
AR-15s
percentage of
are in
people.
circulation
And they
in our
can
country?
I'm sorry, I didn't look that up before I came here, so I don't know. But I can tell you that anybody who wants to walk around in the streets with a concealed weapon to protect themselves is not going to walk around with an AR-15. And anybody in their home who wants to protect themselves is highly unlikely to grab the AR-15 as their first weapon of choice. We had an assault weapons ban in the 90s.
We have to wrap. They're telling me we have to
violated.
do a hard wrap. They're telling me we have to do a hard wrap, but I don't think that's true. And I would look up, if I were you, how many AR-15s are in the U.S. because it's more than you think. Ian, thanks for being here.